Shalom WJC family. It is time for our weekly Torah talk. This week in synagogue, we will be reading Parshat Tavo. Central in Parshat Tavo is bracha. In fact, actually, bracha uklala. So blessing, which has been the theme of the method of our replenishing our souls theme of this high holidays, as well as klala is curse. In Tavo, we are presented with several blessings as well as curses. And what I want to do by taking a look at that section is help us understand during this month of Elul, as we begin doing Teshuva, as we begin reviewing our deeds and doing repentance, how we can do that without feeling shame. Shame is, in fact, an awful emotion. It does not help us do Teshuva. As a matter of fact, if anything, it causes us to want to hide the fact that we are flawed and keeps us from doing an honest Teshuva. So how can we admit that we have done wrong without being ashamed? To help us understand, I want to look first at a verse in chapter 28 of the parsha. Now the parsha has a list of curses, actually, a list of blessings, and then more curses. So this is from the list of blessings. It's a beautiful blessing that we often say at cemeteries today. Baruch atah b'voecha, uvaruch atah b'tzeitecha. Blessed are you in your coming, or in this case, blessed will you be in your coming, in your arrival, and blessed will you be in your going out. Now Rashi, the medieval commentator, looks at this. He says, that's not right. It should. Who comes in before they go out? It should say, Baruch atah b'tzeitecha. Blessed are you in your going out, and then Baruch atah b'voecha. Blessed are you in your coming. So what is with this being backwards? He says it's because it's not about life per se. It's about the way we come into the world. We are blessed when we come into the world, and it's where we go out of the world. So what's common? Rashi says we come into the world free of sin, guilty of nothing, and we go out of the world free of sin, guilty of nothing. Well, at least if we do tshuva, if we live a good life, I guess so. So that's Rashi's very beautiful drash on this. The problem, as raised by Siftei Chachamim, is that it goes on and it gives curses, and later it says, Arur atah b'voecha, ve'arur atah b'tzeitecha. You're cursed in your arrival, and you will be cursed in your going out. How can you both be blessed in your arrival and you're cursed in your arrival if it means not to have sin? Are we born with sin? And some commentators, in fact, say yes, that the Maharal of Prague says actually we're born with sin from the beginning, and that we die with sin, and there's really nothing we can do about it, which in some ways that is kind of freeing, right? We're not supposed to aim for the perfect slate. And if, let's read sin here as flaws, to admit from the start that we're all flawed is actually not maybe such a bad thing, and that we're going to step out of the way, and we shouldn't be ashamed of that. Another beautiful interpretation, of this idea of, arur atah b'voecha, you're cursed when you come into the world, ve'arur atah b'tzeitecha, is in the Talmud, which says that how are we cursed when we come into the world? So there's a midrash, and Siftei Chachamim points this out in the Talmud Nida, page 30b, that tells us that every person in the womb is taught the entire Torah. And as they are birthed into the world, an angel comes and hits them on their mouth, and they forget all of it. And actually this mark here that you can't see under my mustache, but this little bump, they say, is where the angel hits you. It's called a fulcrum. And only rabbis and Talmud scholars know that, because that's where you get hit when you lose your Torah. So what's the curse that you come into the world with? You've forgotten all your Torah. And what's the curse when you go out of the world? that you've forgotten all your Torah that you learned in between. Now we could read that as literally you die so you don't have Torah anymore, but it could also just be that we forget as much as we remember as we go through this world, and as we get older we forget more. And maybe that's a source of shame as well. Even though it's just aging, it's just being human, right? Being mortal, it comes with some perks and it comes with some negatives. And one of the negatives is that we forget and we hurt and we do wrong. But by recognizing that, by recognizing our humanity, whether it's the way the Maharal of Prague does, by saying that we're flawed from the start and will be flawed in the end, and therefore it's okay to recognize our flaws when we do tshuva, or whether it's this play off of the Midrash about forgetting our Torah before we come into the world and forgetting our Torah when we leave the world. And therefore, it's going to happen to all of us, even the most brilliant of scholars, even the most active of people are going to start to slow down. That's just part of being human. It is part of being mortal, and therefore there is no shame in it. The idea is, either way, that doing tshuva is not about feeling ashamed. In fact, shame, if we want to pretend like we have no flaws, or we want to pretend like we're going to live forever and never slow down and never forget anything and never do any wrongs, ultimately you cannot do tshuva that way. Because if we're ashamed, we're going to try and hide it all. Tshuva requires us not to be ashamed, maybe to do something even harder, which is just admit that we're human and not be ashamed of that. May we all find the grace to discover that kind of blessing during this season of tshuva. May we all have the courage to face our mortality and our flaws with honesty. And may we avoid the feeling of shame that will freeze us in our place, and instead, in recognizing our flaws, gather ourselves to move forward anyway, with resolve, to fulfill our purpose, to do tshuva, to get back on the path that God intended for us. Wish you a Shabbat Shalom and some effective tshuva in the couple weeks to come as we approach Rosh Hashanah.